Hello everybody, Nancy Ray Allen here, and in this video I am going to be sharing with you my story of leaving Mormonism. I have talked off and on about my experience being raised in the LDS church and my experience of moving through what a lot of people call a faith crisis, and my journey through that experience and navigating difficult conversations and creating a space of openness and healing where we're creating connection versus disconnection. And I've talked about this several times. And there's always been elements to the story that I have not shared. And there's been opinions and beliefs that I have not shared. And a large degree, this was because I still had some shame about my experiences and fear, and having been raised in an environment and in a culture and in a place in the world where shame is often the method used to manage behavior in little kids and young adults. It's been very potent and very thick in my experience, and I have become very aware the last month or so where I was still holding on to shame. And the truth is, nobody can shame you. They can certainly try. But shame is something that we choose into and that we take on by choice. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "No one can make us feel inferior without our consent," and that is the truth. And so although people may try to shame us, it's important to remember that we are always at the seat of the power within our lives, agents choosing at any given moment. That said, there are environments in which learning healthy ways of processing emotion are not being taught. And instead, people are learning by example that shame is the method to which to navigate difficult things in their life. So with all of those precursors and annoying little things, I'm just going to be vulnerably sharing from the heart today my unfiltered truth and my experience in leaving Mormonism. Now, I was born and raised in the LDS church, and my experience of Mormonism was actually fairly positive. What I loved about it, my childhood, was that there was always a community. There was always kids that believed the same things. And there seemed to be quite a bit of consistency between my Sunday school teachers, my young women leaders, and what my parents were telling me. There was a lot of congruency and consistency, which we know for kids can be very powerful. At a young age, I was incredibly intuitive and very, very spiritual. I could read people's energy. I knew what people were thinking and feeling. And I felt the spirit a lot as a kid. I felt it a lot at church. And a lot of people talk about feeling the spirit or the Holy Ghost as like this warm, burning sensation. And I had that presence with me a lot throughout my childhood, which is part of why I was really confused when I was baptized and told that now I would have that with me all of the time. And that it wouldn't leave now because I was baptized. That didn't make any spiritual, logical sense to me. And that's, I think, when I first began kind of wondering and not totally understanding what I was being told on the outside fitting what I felt on the inside. I was being told this is how God is, and this is how God feels about these things. But then my personal experience of God, of a higher power, was very, very different. And things stopped matching up. But the people in my life, the big people in my life that I loved and I looked up to, like, my grandparents and my parents, continued to reiterate the things that I was being told about God. And so I thought, instead of thinking that maybe this way I was being told of God isn't necessarily true, I started thinking I was untrue, and I started doubting my own feelings and my own intuition. And one of the phrases I remember hearing a lot as a kid was, "Doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith," which basically meant doubt what you feel before you doubt what I'm telling you. And it became really interesting. At the age of 12, my parents went through a divorce, and I began massively seeking out solutions and ways of emotionally dealing with the situation. And the answers I found were not really in church. Not to say that I didn't pray or feel the presence of God in my life, but I leaned to learning real methods that were based in psychology of how to emotionally process trauma and separation and mourning and grieving. And it was at that young age that I decided I wanted to be a motivational speaker and a coach, that I wanted to teach people how to do this and how to have a happy life. I watched some of my siblings really, really struggle through my parents' divorce because they didn't have these tools. And I found myself being able to process things that they weren't able to. So I began pursuing that. And as I began pursuing this area of life coaching and intuitiveness and gifts, I discovered and was introduced to a woman, and she did what she called angel readings. And she had cards, much like the creepy tarot cards people talk about, but they were very light-based. It was all very positive messaging. And she was very intuitive. And she said, I'm going to talk to your angels and ask them a question for you. And she did this, and it was a really interesting experience. And I felt a lot of different feelings throughout it that felt really good and true. And I decided I wanted to do that for other people. So at a really young age, 15, 16, I started doing readings with people, and it was paired with coaching. I would do these spiritual readings using my intuition. I remember one woman who brought her entire family to me, and I did a reading of each and every one of her kids. And I remember as each one of them came and sat in front of me, just feeling so connected to their energy, and just feeling and seeing them and knowing what they needed to hear to heal and to move forward, empowered and motivated and feeling hopeful about their life. And I never felt so connected and so on purpose. Now, I never really got or understood or saw God fully as like an entity, like a being, like people would talk about, this is your Heavenly Father, this is Jesus Christ. I never fully like felt that tangible feeling towards God, but I did feel the essence of it. And I just went with that being enough. A short while later, my bishop found out about what I was doing. A couple of authorities and figures in my life found out what I was doing, these sessions with people. And I was called in. I was commanded twice, actually, by the power of the priesthood, which through the LDS faith is a very, very serious thing. It's like the power that runs everything. I was commanded to stop and desist what I was doing because it was frowned upon by God, and it wasn't okay. And it really confused me at the time. I didn't understand how something that felt good and felt true to who I was so wrong and was so bad. But I just stopped and I shoved it all down. And then in the future, anytime I would be working on healing work with myself or others throughout my career as a coach and a speaker, I would hit kind of a glass ceiling in my mind where I felt God taking me places that the Mormon church couldn't explain. And what I mean by that is there are certain things that they say and believe are true that just didn't match what was going on inside of me. And so I felt very conflicted. But I kept going because I wanted to be good, and I wanted to go to heaven, and I wanted to be with my family forever, and I wanted all of these things, even though it felt so off inside my system. Thank you all for being here. The temple in Mormonism is a very special place to a lot of people. And I get emotional talking about this because, you know, as a little kid, you know, you're raised to believe certain things, and then you want them to be true, you know? And then when you stop believing and when you find them for yourself to not be true, it's emotional. It's kind of like when you found out Santa Claus wasn't real. If any of you ever believed in that. And it's like, dang it, it was so fun to believe that. There were so many things about it that I loved. That's how I felt when I got really, really clear and got a clear answer that it was not true. I mourned, like losing, you know, your best friend. And And it's like losing your best friend, but nobody knows that they're lost because to everybody else, they're still there. It's like if you can imagine your very best friend, so when you love more than anything, like your spouse or whatever, dying, and then aliens replacing their body with a robot, and you know that it's not the real them. You know it's not them. But no one else can see it, and no one else knows. And no one else, they can try to understand, but they really don't, because from their belief system and what they see, you're crazy, you're deceived, you're possessed, you're broken, you're going to hell. It's a very intense process, and not one that to take lightly. People ask sometimes, do you recommend people leave the church? No, I don't. Because if it's not part of your path, and you're not really ready, and you're not leaving for the right reasons, if there were any, it's incredibly hard. It's really hard to leave a paradigm and a condition that was your reality and was true, and this is the way it is. So the temple, I was always told my whole life about this amazing place, and to so many people it is still, and I want to honor that for them. I don't want to take anything away from them. My personal experience of the temple was I would constantly go there. As a little kid, when I was 12, I got a recommend, and I would go once a week, early in the morning. Actually, it was once I got my driver's license, so I must have been 15. I would go early in the morning every Friday and do baptisms by myself, because they had open baptisms at the temple where I live. And I would go there seeking some sort of connection and some sort of clarity. And every time I wouldn't leave with that feeling, I would think there was something wrong, but there was something that I was missing, or I just wasn't good enough yet, or I wasn't like granted that yet. And then when it was time for me to move into the other parts of the temple, as I got older and was preparing to get married, they have a class called Temple Prep class that's meant to prepare you to understand what goes on in the temple. And it doesn't really prepare you, and you don't really know what's going to happen. And then once you get there, it's really intense. I'm going to honor all of the promises that I made as far as secrecy there, simply because I want to respect that. But you get there, and one of the first ceremonies that you do was when it happened, I just bawled through the whole thing. And I think that the temple workers and my mom, who was there, the escort, thought I was crying because it was such a spiritual, beautiful experience. Honestly, I cried because I was fucking terrified. I didn't understand what was going on, and it felt weird and creepy, and I didn't understand it. And the rest of my experience through the temple was very similar. And I remember looking around at all of these people that I was raised knowing, aunts and uncles and people who'd come to be there that day when I took out my endowments, and looking at them thinking, this is like the best secret that's ever kept, that this is what you wear here and what you do here. Like, it shocked me. And I didn't have a sense of peace or clarity or knowingness or anything about that. But I continued to go back, and I did enjoy that it was unique, and I did enjoy that it was exclusive, and I did enjoy that it was tradition. And I kept going back and kept going back, but it never fully settled within me as a peaceful experience. And I haven't been owning that fully. And now I am. And I'm done hiding my experience and my story because people are going to argue with it or say that I'm whatever. there's a couple of things that go on in the church that really could be addressed to support everyone in having a healthier experience, members and non-members. And right now there is a petition going around online that I highly encourage all members and non-members to consider signing. And it's addressing the current practice. And for those of you who don't know, to get to go into the temple, you get to have interviews. As an adult, 2 different interviews, one with your bishop, one with your stake president, all men. You guys, all of our clergy is men. And who ask you questions of a moral nature about your sexuality, about all sorts of things from masturbation to pornography to, it depends on the bishop, it depends on the person. All of these meetings are conducted and interviews are conducted privately. None of them are recorded. There are no adults present, and a lot of these questions are happening for kids ages 8 to 17, youth that are wanting to go to the temple or do baptisms for the dead or get baptized. And there have been some cases of, quite a few cases of it really creating some intense trauma for kids. And even for you, those of you in the church, that this is just the way it's always been, I would love for you to pause and consider, a 10-year-old little girl going into a room with a man that she doesn't really know personally, but she's told he's the father of the ward, and he in some ways has more authority than even her own father. And he asks her questions of a sexual nature, and that's okay. And how that could be grooming for someone that, men or people of the priesthood asking you questions about your sexuality is okay, and all the different places that can lead. And there have been some kids that have struggled with different things, that when they're asked these questions, it's incredibly hard for them to process it. And being asked such specific questions about masturbation and about, their sexual orientation, all these things, it's really, really hard. And right now there's not any sort of system for regulating and not only protecting the kid, but also protecting the leader. Like you would see in a school setting where, teachers aren't allowed to be one-on-one alone with students. They get to always have their door open and different things like that. There's no precautions set in place. And signing this petition isn't to push down the church or do anything mean to them. It's simply to raise awareness, hey, this is going on, and there are some things that we could do to prevent anything like this happening in the future. So I highly encourage you to sign that and to look into doing that, and to sharing that around, whether you're a member or a non-member. There's a lot of practices that go on in the church that create a certain mindset and approach to living our life that are incredibly shame-inducing. And there's some things that we get to be aware of that are going on. There's some really startling statistics that I'm going to read with you guys, and I'm going to be very transparent about my opinion of what is causing a lot of this that's going on. And this is just something that can happen when you have an area saturated with one belief system and you have a lot of different cultural things that come in place. Some of them are cultural, you guys, and some of them are actual church doctrine that we get to just finally be aware of and address openly. Because when you're taught something from the time you're a little kid and you never question it, and then all of a sudden you wake up and go, oh wait, maybe it is a little awkward and inappropriate for a 9-year-old girl to be interviewed by a grown man she doesn't know about her sexuality without her parents there or without her parents' permission. Then maybe all of a sudden it'll be like, oh, well, yeah, that is a little bit fucked up. Maybe there's something we can do about that. So here's some of the statistics that I want to share with you guys. So I want to talk to you guys about Utah, because this is one of the most saturated areas of members of the LDS Church in the world. And there is such a high correlation that it's just important to address. So 2/3 of Utah is Mormon. It's the most Mormon state in the country, most Mormon area saturated in the world. So 2/3 of them are Mormon. And it is the #1 highest rated state for porn subscriptions. People talk a lot about porn kills love and all of these different things. But it's interesting to find that, the state that is the most religious and has the most strict rules around sexuality and the most shaming around the human body and talking about sex and women's bodies and all this shame that goes on is also the highest for pornography subscriptions. It's something to think about. It's the number one highest for depression. Why might that be? Well, shame is an epidemic where it's not that you've done something wrong, you are wrong. And the shame culture that is going on right now in this area that is so highly religious is completely and totally debilitating. It is destroying people's sense of self-worth, clarity, their mental capacities. It's the highest for depression. It's also the number one highest rate of rape. What? The highest state of rape. Like, in my mind, I was immediately going to, all these areas I was taught as a kid, or like ghetto areas that have lots of like gang violence. And I'm thinking of these states and cities that are massive populations. No, it has twice that of New York City. This is just staggering, you guys. It has the number one highest rate of child abuse. 21 Utahns die of prescription drug overdose a month. And Utah is the 7th highest rate of alcohol poisoning deaths in the United States. You guys, over 60% of their population is LDS. Now, I'm not saying everyone who's, falling into these statistics is LDS or isn't LDS. It doesn't matter. What I'm saying is it's time for us to begin addressing the shame culture that is creating and perpetuating so much pain and so much violence and so much addiction. Why are people seeking prescription drugs? Why are people seeking pornography prescriptions? Why are people doing this? They're trying to fill some sort of void and hole inside of themselves that feels so inadequate and not good enough. And I know some members of the church would be like, well, the reason it's that way in Utah is the saints are being persecuted and Satan is trying to stop them. And I say, I don't believe you. I don't believe that. I believe that it's time for us to address the shame. And one of the things that we're doing that's damaging the shame is I'll go live talking about Mormonism culture, and I'll have a bunch of people jump on and like ream my ass because I said Mormon. How dare you point out one religious group? Like, what? Well, why not? Do you get mad at the people who are like anti-meth campaigns because they're pointing out meth? No, it doesn't matter. That's what's relevant to me. That's my background and my history, and it's true. People are so busy arguing about the way we are arguing versus actually looking at the issue. They're getting so fucked up that I say fuck, that they don't actually look at the principle that they are being controlled by a word and emotionally turned upside down and judging people based on nose rings, tattoos, language. It's shocking to me how differently I'm treated with a nose ring. It's hilarious. It's crazy. And, one of the things my husband even said when I got it, because I didn't ask his permission, because that's fucked up. All of you that would do something like that. Like, oh, honey, can I dye my hair? Can I cut my hair? Can I get it? Like, stop that, all right? That's rooted in this archaic culture of like, let's ask people permission to just be ourselves. But one of the things he said was, because we have a very open, honest, beautiful relationship, he goes, you know what, honestly, the little Mormon boy inside of me is getting really triggered right now because like my association to that is slut. Like that you must be a slut because you have that. Is that crazy? And we're literally programming all these little tiny humans to judge people. I remember as a little kid, the energy that I had towards people with tattoos or people who were smoking or drinking coffee. I literally thought that they were the spawn of Satan. That's what I was wired and programmed to believe and understand. And it wasn't until I went to visit my amazing grandma and saw that she smoked and drank coffee that I was like, huh, maybe not everybody who does this is evil and going to burn in hell. It's time for us, you guys, to start addressing some of these issues and releasing the shame. Let go of the shame around it. Let go. I don't want to shame people that still believe in Mormonism, that are LDS. Like, that's their personal belief system. But I am not going to not share my story and personal beliefs about my experience and not own it simply because it is contradictory to theirs. It's bizarre for us to be saying like, okay, yeah, you can go online and share your testimony about your church and share all these Mormon messages, but the minute that I share my journey out of it, Now I'm the bad guy and I'm wrong? I'm not blocking you and unfriending you because you're sharing what you believe. So why are you doing that to me? And it's time for us, you guys, to begin looking at all of these experiences and situations with some spiritual logic, stepping outside of these like archaic rules. There's all these rules in your life, guys, rules by religion, rules by like culture, rules by the area you're raised in, rules by your family, that when you actually look at them, don't make any sense. You look at them and they're actually debilitating. It's actually the opposite of what's going to support you. It's actually the opposite of what's going to create healing and joy and love in your life. And it's time to set those down and use some spiritual logic. Use your intuition. You have an intuition inside of you that's going to assist you in navigating these uncomfortable situations. And what I decided long ago is I'm not going to negate my intuition because it's different than someone else's belief system. It's okay. And, you know, I had a really interesting experience lately. I had one of my friends who's an atheist, and as I talk to her, I can just so see like why she believes what she believes, to the point that I almost started questioning my own beliefs. And then when I returned to my own story, my own evolution of spirituality, I left the church based on one question that came to me after my morning prayer and meditation. As I was journaling, the question came to me from God, and it said, if I asked you to leave the church, would you? And my answer and my immediate knee-jerk reaction was, no, I would not. And I realized in that moment that I was so committed to a paradigm, to a culture, to a church, that I was compromising my relationship with my God and my intuition for the sake of fitting in their box. And it's when I committed to no longer doing that, I was no longer going to do that, that everything began to change for me. And I started releasing years and years of shame, because every time I would explore spirituality and start to open up new levels of expansion and understanding in my life, I would hit a glass ceiling, because what I was seeing, feeling, and sensing and learning did not fit in the box of the church. I would have feelings and senses of other lifetimes, but reincarnation's not in the church. I would have feeling and sensations that God is not a man. God's not a man. But the church says that he is. And it was so confusing to me, right? And I know there are people who are going to rip this apart and like psychoanalyze me and have fun, okay? But it's time, you guys, to set down all of that. And again, the labels, this isn't like, you know, post-Mormon versus Mormon. Like, it's not like, that's not the enemy. I'm not the enemy. The church is not the enemy. The shame is the enemy, you guys. And the shame is everywhere. And there's little practices inside and outside the church and the way that we orient towards members and non-members that can be massively shifted to create an environment that isn't so embedded and literally cancerous with shame. It destroys everything. It totally erodes your sense of clarity of self-worth and purpose and knowingness. And it is time right now. And I'm asking and calling all of you to this next expansive space of utilizing spiritual logic in your life and taking a good look at cause and effect, right? When we do this, it creates that. Thinking about it and paying attention. For example, the church's announcement about kids from gay parents no longer being qualified for certain spiritual rituals and rites of passage that are so fundamental to little kids raised in the church, and having it leak out all over the planet before there's even an announcement, and dozens of kids committing suicide successfully, and then hundreds attempting, and even more, I'm sure, contemplating it. What if we could like pause and like maybe, you know, like have a plan and a process for dispersing that type of information? And there are people being railroaded, amazing people. And it's time for us each to start seeing the part that we play. Anywhere that in your life you're still shaming yourself and not owning your story, that is perpetuating a culture of shame. Anytime that you make someone wrong based on what they believe, their nose ring, the color of their hair, their sexual orientation, the color of their skin, and where they were raised, and you make them bad and wrong and evil, and you condemn them to outer darkness and the fiery pits of hell, you are in the act of shaming someone. Every religion I've ever heard of says that God is the ultimate judge of people. And it's time that we let that be, and we start totally blowing the fuck up out of these stereotypes that put people in a box and make them wrong and evil and bad. And it's time that we release it. It's time. So this is my story. This is my experience, and there are other cool things I could talk about with my journey of my evolution of my experience, my relationship with God, but I feel like I've touched on the most important elements today. I want to thank you all who've been here and who have supported and who lovingly continue to be a part of the journey with me. And regardless of whether you agree with every single word I say or not, that you still hold a place of honoring my journey. And I love you and I thank you for it. And I am sending you all a lot of love, and till next time.